No, there's scant information. In fact, there's an archive at Santa Cruz campus of Southern California University, and they have his archives there, and they're just developing those, but we've looked at some of the materials, and frankly, there's nothing there that helps us. There's one exception to that. There is a letter from his wife, Betty Jorgensen, who was actually with him in Times Square. And that letter is, interesting to kind of build the scene, but it is of no help in determining any further evidence one way or the other. So that's been a kind of a dry run for us, unfortunately, because he would be a wealth of information. The other artist that was there, Horace Bristol, is also a famous photographer from that time period. And his family is looking feverishly for the materials now. We didn't know that he was there. In fact, we learned that through the Jorgensen letter, and that was after the book was published. But they've been able to come up with nothing further than what we already had.
What about other people in the photo like that? So,
the sailor in the white uniform.
you see in the Jorgensen photo?
Yes, there's.
Look at the size of that hand, man. I'm just wondering if other people remember this scene.
Well, the problem with that is they're actually, similar to how a lot of people claim to be the sailor, many people claim to be those other people in the photo as well. And we don't make a determination on that, though we are able to narrow it down to two people, credible sources. And I did talk to both those people, one through another source, but one directly. And they were of no help whatsoever either. And what becomes clear though, and in this way they were of help, is this happened fast, and it was like lightning. And no one was really taking note of it. They just didn't. Even the photographer the next day forgot about it. George Mendonsa didn't even know about the photograph. Brad Friedman didn't know about the photograph. It wasn't until years later that they did. And so they're trying to remember the scene, sit together 30, 40, 50 years later. And that was, that's now you're dealing with memories. So what we do is we focus on what does the picture tell us. And that much we can actually piece together pretty carefully what actually happened with that. Right now there's also some further research going on. The scientists who are actually looking at the Times Square from all the pictures to determine the exact second that picture was taken, which they can determine by the shadows in the background and comparing them at different times. So I've been in contact with them, so that's some interesting information as well. And all that does is it tells us the wider story, nothing beyond what we've been able to find to determine who's in fact in the picture.
And the time span of the 4 shots is what?
Approximately 10 seconds.
10 seconds? That's a long picture.
It is a long piece. One source came forward, one woman who claimed to be the nurse, came forward and contacted us, and I said, okay, well, we interviewed her. And I said, how long was the kiss? She said, approximately 3 seconds. And that's of course impossible. But no, it's about 10 seconds.
My wife, and the day the war ended, she's in the background. And she can be positively identifying photos from that era, those years. She can positively be matched up against the girl in the background. Very easy.
And the thing is, she's actually still alive to this very day. Rita Petrie was her name at the time, now Rita Mendonsa. And she's alive to this very day, getting ready to celebrate almost 70 years of service. One thing that is about Rita Petrie too, when she smiles often, when you look at the woman in the background, she has a tendency when she smiles to bring her the sides of her mouth down. When Rita Petrie smiles this very day, it's the same formation that she makes as the woman in the background. It's kind of interesting to see. Yes?
George, has she ever forgiven you for kissing?
No, it was, during World War II, there was 15 million of us guys in the service. So there were lots and lots of parents in this country. And I say that the parents of the veterans that come back from World War II, the parents are the ones that got hit the hardest by World War II. And the ship I was assigned to, the Sullivan, there was 5 brothers got lost. So when the war ended, it wasn't the sailors or the servicemen that raised hell. They did, it was some. But it was the parents that were the ones that felt the end of the war more than anybody. So when the war ended that day in Times Square, it was the adult population in the country that did most of the pleasure and the excitement of ending the war.
One thing that became very clear too when we were researching for this is these celebrations were not unique, of course, to Times Square. There were impromptu parades and celebrations taking place all over the country and at all ages, even little boys and girls came up with these impromptu parades. When you look at the newspapers of August 14 and 15 and 16 and 17, you see evidence of this, again, in almost every single major city, including Providence, Rhode Island, going on. So it really was an amazing, amazing thing. The other thing I'd like to say, in reference to your question, is the Greta Friedman, who is still alive today, though she is not doing as well as she was when we were doing our research. She is 91 years old right now. But she and Rita, George's wife, have met often, several times over the years, and I've been in their company. And it's really an amazing friendship that they have. In fact, George Mendonsa kind of gets pushed to the side. They actually have a wonderful, very friendly relationship. They laugh in a very hearty fashion about that day back in 1945, so, which is also kind of nice to see, as it turns out. Yes, sir?
Just two questions. One is, did she have any idea that George was about to kiss her, or did George just grab her and kiss her? And the other question I have is, I've never noticed it before, but your left hand is up. It's not under her head or supporting it, and is, I guess, is that the way you normally kiss? Just or you have to do.
We're in Radio City Music Hall, and the people out in the street are pounding on the doors. And of course, we're in the theater, and we're wondering what the hell's going on outside there. So finally, when we get out into the street in Times Square, there's wall-to-wall people. Now the war ends. I went into Child's bar and I started popping a few drinks. And when I come out into Times Square and I saw the nurse, well, I thought back to the Bunker Hill when we pulled over 100 men out of the water that were hurting bad. And we put them on the hospital ship. And that's still in the back of my head. So when I saw the nurse, that all came to me. That's the reason I grabbed that dress. I believe it was because of what I saw those nurses out there when them guys are all in the water. We pulled hundreds of them out of the water.
One thing that does come across too, in terms of the posing of that picture, that's been duplicated so many times over the years because it is quite a posturing for the kiss. I kiss my wife often, and it doesn't look like that. But I think what's important here, and George has said this several times when I was interviewing him, he says, you know, I remember it was a very awkward hold that I had. That's how he described it. That's his words, not my words, an awkward hold. And examining the four pictures, I think what's also important here, and it kind of lines up very nicely with George's story about the nurse. Yes, he's with his date, but I think it's important to see how he holds the nurse. First of all, the hand is not coming down on the neck or any other portion of her body. On top of that, the hand stays at the waist. It does not drop any further south. These, I think, are important considerations here. This was a kiss of jubilation. It was a kiss of thankfulness. It is not, as some people have reported it, the inappropriate nature that some people could interpret. What we need to understand is that what was happening out there in Times Square, this was very common to see. This was a man who had never done this since then or any other time that we're aware of that he can remember. I think the pose lines up very nicely with that story, that awkward hold, as he said, that he had on the nurse that day. The other thing, in our interview with Greta Friedman, we asked her repeatedly, do you have any issues with what happened here? And she said, absolutely not. These are her words. This was consistent with what was going on there. These men had fought in the war on this day. It's the culture of the day, and we all wanted to be part of it, and frankly, everyone's kissing everybody. Now, this happens 5-6 days later, very different story. DJ Day, August 14, 1945, it's the culture of the nation. Everyone's kissing everybody. So, yes, sir.
I want to point out that this Hometown Weekly says the kissing soldier. I don't know how they didn't know. Because we're different.
There are a lot of soldiers kissing Times Square as well, sir. Yes, ma'am.